Sirens in Havenwood. A scream tore through Havenwood's peaceful start to the day, an abrasive sound utterly unlike the familiar morning sounds. Not the gentle moo of McGregor's cattle, nor the blacksmith's steady hammer blows, but a high-pitched, agonizing cry that left Billy Miller trembling. Peeking through a gap in the curtains, a frantic pulse hammered in his chest. Crimson and azure light painted the faded yellow of his walls in stark patterns. Two patrol cars, parked at odd angles, thrummed with idling engines, a threatening drone. More followed, each arrival signaling impending disaster. Billy threw himself from bed, his bare feet silent on the aged floorboards. He edged to the doorway, straining to hear. A confused babble of voices, tight with anxiety, rose from downstairs. He picked out his father's, laced with an unfamiliar, raw terror. Footsteps whispered down the stairs, hand pressed against the wall for balance. Chaos reigned in the living room. Officers in Navy uniforms moved with grim purpose. One spoke to his father, slumped and ashen on the sofa. Another stood sentinel by the hall leading to the master bedroom. Billy's gaze darted around, seeking some anchor of normality, but found only turmoil. A strange, coppery odor permeated the air. A heavy, expectant quiet hung between the officers' clipped commands. Then he spotted Mark. Near the entrance, hands secured behind him, stood Mark. The usual cocky grin was erased, replaced by vacant eyes. His jaw worked, a nerve twitching in his cheek. Flanked by two impassive officers, Mark's eyes flicked to Billy for an instant, and a spark ignited within that hollowness. Fear, perhaps? Remorse? Billy couldn't decipher it. "Mark?" he breathed, barely audible above the house's strained quiet. No response, not even acknowledgement. The officers guided him toward the door. "Wait!" Billy's cry came too late. They vanished into the dazzling lights and the swelling tide of neighbors, drawn from their homes by the blaring sirens. His father looked up, eyes rimmed with red. Silence was his only response, a slow shake of the head, his face a canvas of grief and disbelief. Billy longed to offer comfort, a hug, but an unseen barrier held him back. His father radiated a sorrow too profound to touch. He retreated, bewildered, back to his room. What was happening? Why Mark? Where's his father going? He collapsed onto the bed, clutching the threadbare teddy bear his mother had given him before she left. He squeezed, seeking solace in its familiar softness. He missed her with a fresh, sharp ache. She'd know what to do, what to say. She'd mend this brokenness. The clamor persisted downstairs. Muffled voices, slamming doors, the persistent strobing lights. Later, Mrs. Peterson from across the way arrived bearing a casserole. He overheard her murmuring to his father in hushed, sympathetic tones. He remained upstairs, catching fragments of their talk. "Found him in his bed, Mark. I can't fathom it. Such a tragedy. Poor Robert." The words circled him, senseless and horrifying. He cobbled together a narrative from the shards of information, filling the gaps with dread. Mr. Miller was gone. Mark was in custody. And Havenwood, his secure haven, lay in ruins. The sirens faded, but their echo remained, a constant reminder of the darkness that had enveloped them. He closed his eyes, craving oblivion, praying for a rude awakening from a nightmare. But the metallic taste on his tongue, the hollow ache in his chest, testified to the grim reality. A brother's shadow. Billy burrowed deeper under the faded quilt, its flowered pattern a ghostly hug from Mom. Sunlight, diluted by the late hour, stretched across the lawn, mirroring the long reach of sorrow within him. He squeezed his eyes shut, seeking refuge in happier recollections. The three of them, a tangle of limbs in the old skiff, the lake of boundless sapphire. Dad, laughter etching lines around his eyes, patiently showed Mark the art of casting. Mark, a decade younger then, brow knit in concentration, mimicked each gesture, a rare softness smoothing the perpetual set of his jaw. The air, a heady blend of pine and damp earth, hummed with untamed promise. Younger still, Billy had been content to simply absorb it all, the boat's gentle sway a lullaby of peace. Those fishing expeditions, their sacred rite, a world of shared jokes and unspoken camaraderie. He could almost feel the rough scratch of pine bark, the tacky sweetness of sap on his fingers. The treehouse, Dad's grand ambition, a project intended to braid their lives together. Mark, surprisingly skilled, hammered with a fervor that belied his initial resistance, a quiet pride blooming with each secured plank. Dad, the architect of fun, offered steady guidance, his voice resonating with satisfaction. Billy, tasked with fetching and holding, discovered a sense of belonging he hadn't known he lacked. The treehouse, their haven, a monument to their odd, cobbled-together family. But that Eden was lost. Now, the memories pricked like shattered glass, each sliver sharp with regret. He opened his eyes. The room snapped back into harsh focus. The boat and the treehouse, mirages, vanished. Only the stifling quiet remained, punctuated by the house's mournful settling. He recalled the arguments, the volatile slams, the poisonous words that had become the soundtrack of their lives. Dad's usually steady baritone, warped by anger, accused Mark of indolence, disrespect, of failures beyond Billy's grasp. Mark's retort, clipped and defiant, barbed with a bitterness that chilled Billy's blood. "You treat me like some charity case." Mark had screamed one night, the words ricocheting. "I gave you a home, a family." Dad had countered, his voice thick with wounded pride. "And this is how you repay my kindness." Billy had shrunk in his room, hands clamped over his ears, desperate to silence the cacophony of resentment that had curdled their once sweet home. He couldn't decipher the change. Mark had always been Mark, withdrawn, guarded, a low simmer of anger never far from the surface, but never directed with such force at Dad. Heavy, hesitant footsteps echoed outside his door. He recognized Mark's tread. He held his breath, willing him to disappear. The footsteps paused, a beat of silence, then a tentative knock. "Billy." Mark's voice, a mere thread of sound. Billy remained silent. I know you're in there." Another pause, stretched thin. Can I come in?" Billy was mute, paralyzed. He couldn't face Mark. He couldn't bear to witness the guilt, the fury, the tangled mess of emotions that surely lay beneath his brother's practiced mask. He couldn't confront the ruins of their former lives. After an eternity, the footsteps faded. Billy exhaled, a shaky release. Alone once more, swallowed by shadows, the silence amplifying the ache within. He clutched the quilt tighter, yearning to vanish, to rewind the clock, to return to the days before the shouting, before the secrets, before the creeping darkness had devoured them all. The interview. The Miller house was smaller than she'd imagined, a modest two-story with peeling paint and a garden choked with weeds. It felt ordinary, too ordinary for the kind of violence that had unfolded within its walls. Detective Jones took a deep breath and approached the door, the scent of dying roses clinging to the air. A woman with tired eyes and a trembling hand answered the bell. "Mrs. Miller," Jones presumed. She introduced herself, flashing her badge. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mrs. Miller. I need to speak with Billy, if that's all right." The woman nodded, her throat working. He's in his room. Barely come out since." Her voice trailed off, thick with unshed tears. "Upstairs, first door on the left." Jones thanked her and stepped inside. The air was heavy with grief and the stale odor of cooked food. She climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing in the oppressive silence. Pausing before Billy's door, she knocked softly. "Billy? It's Detective Jones. Can I come in?" A muffled voice answered, "Yeah, whatever." She opened the door to find Billy huddled on his bed, surrounded by a fortress of pillows. The room was dimly lit, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. Empty soda cans and crumpled chip bags littered the floor. He hadn't showered. His hair was greasy and matted, his eyes red-rimmed and swollen. He looked much younger than 18. "Hey, Billy," Jones said gently, pulling up a chair. "Mind if I sit?" He shrugged, not meeting her gaze. "I know this is incredibly difficult, Billy. I just need to ask you a few questions about what happened." She kept her voice soft, conversational. No accusatori tones. Just simple, direct questions. When was the last time you saw your stepfather, Mark? Billy mumbled something unintelligible. Can you speak up, Billy? Yesterday morning. He left for work. Did anything seem unusual about him that morning? Was he agitated? Upset? He shook his head slowly. No, same as always. He made himself coffee, kissed Mom goodbye, and left. Jones noted the slight hesitation before kissed Mom goodbye. And what about your relationship with Mark, Billy? Would you say you were close? He shifted uncomfortably on the bed. He was all right. We didn't really talk much. Did you ever argue? Have any disagreements? Another pause. This time, it was longer, more pronounced. Jones waited patiently, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes, Billy finally admitted, picking at a loose thread on his blanket. About chores, school, stupid stuff. Anything more serious than stupid stuff, Billy? She kept her tone neutral, encouraging him to open up. He flinched, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding hers. No, nothing like that. Jones leaned forward slightly. Billy, it's important that you're honest with me. Did you ever see Mark with anyone besides your mother? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. The air in the room felt suddenly thick, charged with unspoken tension. No, he said quickly, too quickly. Why would I? Jones studied him, her expression unreadable. She knew he was lying. The subtle tells were all there. The averted gaze, the fidgeting hands, the strained tone of his voice. But she also knew pushing too hard, too soon, would only shut him down. Okay, Billy, I understand this is difficult. I'm going to leave you my card. If you remember anything else, anything at all, please call me. Even if it seems insignificant, it could be important. She stood up, leaving her card on the cluttered bedside table. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. Billy, your mom needs you right now. Try to be there for her. She left him alone in the dim room, the weight of his secrets pressing down on him. The scent of dying roses followed her down the stairs. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her gut, that Billy Miller knew more than he was letting on. The question was, what was he hiding and why? Secrets in the night. The stale air in the cramped interview room vibrated with unspoken accusations. Billy Miller, perched on the edge of his chair, worried a frayed edge of the upholstery. Bloodshot eyes flicked around the space, avoiding Detective Jones's unwavering scrutiny. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, an irritating drone that amplified the heavy silence. Billy, Jones began gently, her tone coaxing. Anything else you recall? Anything at all you've been holding back? He gave a sharp, negative shake of his head. No, ma'am. I've told you everything. Yet his hands clasped tightly in his lap betrayed his unease. Jones inclined forward slightly, her face etched with concern. Billy, I realize how difficult this is. Losing your stepfather, it's a terrible blow. But we need to understand what happened, for Mark's sake and for yours. He sniffled, swiping at his nose with a clumsy hand. An unwelcome image surfaced. Mark, outlined against the pale gleam of moonlight seeping through the kitchen window, slipping out the back. It had been quite late, around 2 or 3. Billy, unable to find sleep, had been tormented by the nightmares that had plagued him ever since everything went wrong. He dismissed it then, convincing himself Mark was simply restless, perhaps taking a walk for some air. But now, under Jones's perceptive gaze, the memory felt tainted, suggestive of something darker. It's all right, Billy, Jones reassured, her voice dripping with calming compassion. You can confide in me. Often, the smallest details unlock everything. He swallowed hard, fighting the obstruction in his throat. The burden of his secret pressed down on him, suffocating. He didn't want to incriminate Mark. Despite everything, the simmering resentment and anger, a corner of his heart still sought Mark's approval, still feared the ramifications of this disclosure. I don't know if it matters, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. But sometimes Mark would go out during the night. Jones's eyes narrowed, the subtle shift in her expression revealing heightened interest. Go out? Where to? Billy hesitated, his thoughts swirling. I don't know. He never said where he went. I saw him a few times sneaking out. Through the back entrance. Quiet as a shadow, like he didn't want to be heard. He pictured the muted click of the door latch, the almost silent rustle of Mark's windbreaker as he vanished into the darkness. The cool night air that had wafted into Billy's room, carrying with it the subtle aroma of damp earth, and something else, something indefinable. A suggestion of cologne, perhaps, or a more acrid, metallic tang. How often did you witness these nocturnal departures? Jones probed, her pen hovering above her notepad. Maybe 3, possibly 4 times? Over the last few weeks, Billy answered, his voice gaining a measure of strength. He was surprised to discover a sense of relief at sharing this. The secret had been eating away at him. Did he ever mention his destination? Billy shook his head. No, he never brought it up. And I didn't ask. I prefer not to know. He could practically see the gears turning in Jones's mind. He watched her quickly jot something down, her face a mask of professional neutrality. Did he appear disturbed before leaving? She inquired. Agitated? Unhappy? Sometimes, Billy confirmed, recalling how Mark would pace the floor, his jaw clenched, his eyes smoldering with suppressed fury. He would argue with my mom occasionally. Muted arguments, but you could sense his anger. He felt an odd surge of power, of agency, as he spoke. He was finally contributing, finally helping to untangle the riddle that had engulfed them. Yet, underneath, a persistent unease lingered. Was he doing the right thing? Was he helping to unearth the truth, or simply fanning the flames, consigning Mark to an undeserved fate? Jones snapped her notepad shut, her gaze locking with Billy's. Thank you, Billy, she said, her voice genuine. This has been very helpful. You've been incredibly brave. Whispers and rumors. The acrid tang of scorched coffee permeated Mabel's, a scent usually Sarah welcomed like an old friend. Today, however, it was overshadowed by a heavy atmosphere, a stifling blanket of unease. Every seat was taken, each conversation a low murmur, like clandestine dealings conducted over plates of greasy fare. He was in debt up to his eyeballs. A woman sporting curlers confided to her neighbor, her voice a bare rustle against the din of cutlery. That landscaping venture he started last year blew through borrowed money from half the county. Always putting on a show, mind you. Buying drinks, brand new truck, all smoke and mirrors, I tell you. Sarah, cradling a cup of the burnt brew, feigned interest in the time-worn wallpaper's floral pattern. Wherever she turned, the narrative remained constant. Hushed gossip depicting Mr. Miller as desperate, financially perched on a precipice. Whispers of gambling debts circulated, alongside tales of a disastrous cryptocurrency investment and even an alleged affair with a woman from beyond the town limits. And that Stepson, croaked old Mr. Henderson, the town's self-appointed chronicler. Always a peculiar one. Reticent. Kept to himself. Never met your gaze. Probably harbored resentment towards Miller for, well, you know. His tone dropped conspiratorially, though the affair was hardly a secret. Sarah released an internal sigh. Resentment was a potent motive, yet it felt too simplistic. She craved concrete evidence, not mere supposition. She needed to grasp the internal workings of the Miller family, the subtle currents that flowed beneath the facade of their ordinary existence. Later, that afternoon, Sarah found herself facing Mrs. Miller within the sterile confines of the local funeral parlor. The widow's eyes were swollen and bloodshot, yet her self-possession was noteworthy. Almost unsettlingly so, Sarah mused. People are saying dreadful things, Mrs. Miller breathed, her voice barely audible. About John's finances, about Michael. Sarah offered an empathetic nod. I understand, Mrs. Miller, but it's vital you share everything, regardless of its perceived insignificance. Were there financial strains? Any family secrets? Mrs. Miller paused, her gaze drifting towards the elaborate coffin housing her deceased husband. John, he provided well for us, she began tentatively, as if weighing her every word. But he possessed a certain impulsiveness. Some investments fared poorly. Nothing that could possibly justify this. Sarah gently persisted. And Michael? Was there tension between him and your husband besides? Mrs. Miller's shoulders slumped perceptibly. John could be demanding. He held expectations for Michael, desired him to follow in his footsteps, inherit the business. Michael always yearned to be a musician. It generated conflict, undoubtedly. But I never imagined. Her voice faltered, choked by sorrow. Sarah scrutinized her closely, searching for any hint of deceit. She witnessed only grief, raw and unbridled. Yet beneath the grief, she detected something else, a reservation, a reluctance to disclose the complete picture. As Sarah drove away from the funeral home, the sinking sun casting elongated shadows across the townscape, she couldn't shake the conviction that she had merely grazed the surface. The swirling rumors were mere distractions, clouding the genuine secrets concealed within the Miller family. Secrets that might hold the key to Mr. Miller's untimely demise. She knew a deeper excavation was required, a painstaking sifting of fabrications and half-truths, until she located the single thread capable of unraveling the entire intricate tangle. The secret account. Detective Jones sat across from Robert Miller in his meticulously organized office. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, yet the room still felt sterile, devoid of warmth. Miller fidgeted, adjusting his tie for the 10th time in as many minutes. "Mr. Miller, thank you for your cooperation. I know this is difficult." Jones kept her voice calm, a soothing balm against the raw edges of grief and suspicion. "We're just trying to understand everything that led to what happened." He nodded stiffly. "Anything to help." "I've been reviewing your financial records," she said, placing a thin file on the polished mahogany desk. "Everything seems in order, but I noticed a few unusual transactions. Small amounts, regularly deposited into an account at First National Bank. An account not listed on your primary financial statements." Miller's face paled slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I don't know what you're talking about." Jones offered a small, sympathetic smile. "It's all right, Mr. Miller. Sometimes we forget things, especially under stress. The account number is 4,789,221.36. Does that ring any bells?" He avoided her gaze, focusing on a framed photograph on his desk. A picture of him and his late wife, both smiling radiantly. A pang of guilt twisted in Jones's stomach. She never enjoyed causing pain, but the truth had a way of demanding its due. Finally, he sighed. It's a savings account. For Mark. A savings account he's unaware of?" Miller hesitated. "Yes. I wanted to ensure he had a good start in life, a nest egg, so to speak." Jones leaned forward slightly. "The deposit started about a year ago, just after you married Mark's mother." "That's very generous of you, Mr. Miller. But some of the withdrawals are interesting. Large sums paid to Northwood Academy?" The color drained completely from Miller's face. He looked like a man caught in a sudden, blinding storm. It's a mistake. I can explain. Northwood Academy is a prestigious boarding school, Mr. Miller. A very expensive one. Were you planning on sending Mark there?" He finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "It was a consideration. He's been difficult. I thought a structured environment, away from everything here, might be good for him. A fresh start." "Did you discuss this with Mark?" "No. I hadn't made a final decision." "Mr. Miller," Jones said softly, "Mark is a young man struggling with grief, with the loss of his mother. Discovering you were secretly planning to send him away. That could be devastating. Did he know about the account?" "No, absolutely not. I kept it secret from everyone. It was a surprise." A surprise that reeked of betrayal, Jones thought. She imagined Mark, already feeling like an outsider, an unwelcome guest in his own home, discovering his stepfather was planning to ship him off. The anger, the resentment, it was a potent cocktail. "Mr. Miller, I understand your intentions may have been good, but secrets like these, they have a way of festering, of poisoning relationships. This information will need to be included in our report." She paused, observing his reaction. He looked defeated. The picture of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Miller. We may need to speak again." As Jones walked out of the office, the sterile air seemed to thicken, heavy with unspoken words and the weight of hidden truths. Outside, the sun felt less warm, less forgiving. She pulled out her phone, a knot tightening in her stomach. She had a feeling this was just the beginning. Confession. Detective Jones tinted her fingers, the sterile glare of the interrogation room highlighting the simple band on her left hand. "Your prints were all over the scene, Mark. The whiskey bottle, the overlook railing, and on the deceased, Mr. Miller." Mark squirmed, the plastic chair protesting with a groan. His gaze snagged on a frayed edge of his jeans, anything to avoid her scrutiny. "I said I was there. We argued." An argument culminating in a fatal plunge, Mark. Unwitnessed. Jones closed the distance between them, her tone softening, coaxing. "Walk me through it." He finally met her eyes, bloodshot and haunted. "He banished me, okay? When I was 13. Said I was bad news. Dumped me at that damn boarding school. Years. He robbed me of my childhood." His voice cracked, a visible shiver racking him. So the confrontation. It was a statement, not a query. Mark conceded with a nod, his defiance evaporating. "I went. I needed answers. Why he did it." He just sat there, drinking like it was nothing, like I was making a fuss over nothing. He raked a hand through his already chaotic hair. I demanded an explanation. I begged him to tell me why. He just smirked, said I was too fragile, that I'd never belong, not with his crowd, not anywhere. He actually said, "Mark's Adam's apple bobbed. I was a mistake." Jones held her silence, allowing him to navigate the treacherous currents of his past. I snapped. I started shouting. I grabbed the whiskey bottle, called him a monster. He rose, looming over me, saturated with the stench of liquor. He shoved me. Hard. Said I was worthless, just like my mother. Mark's voice thickened, raw with suppressed pain. That's when, I don't know, something just broke inside. I shoved him back. He faltered, lost footing. The railing. His voice died, his eyes widening with a terrifying cocktail of disbelief and horror. The railing failed. Jones offered, her voice a balm. A slow nod, tears now breaching his defenses, carving tracks through his stubble. He reached for me, but it was too late. He just went over. I froze. I couldn't process it. I didn't intend for that to happen. He shielded his face, his body convulsing with sobs. It was an accident. I swear it was an accident. Jones reached across the table, her hand settling on his trembling forearm. "Mark, look at me." He lifted his head reluctantly, his gaze swimming in a sea of torment. "I need the full story, every detail, from the moment you arrived at the house." He sucked in a ragged breath, and the confession unfurled, a torrent of grief, rage, and remorse. He painted a vivid portrait of the house, its scent of aged wealth and sour spirits. The flinty look Mr. Miller had given him, a blend of contempt and something else indefinable. He relived every exchange, every nuance, every fleeting shadow of emotion. As he spoke, the jigsaw pieces fell into place for Detective Jones. Years of buried resentment, explosive fury, a dangerous cocktail of alcohol and repressed feelings. A tragedy spawned from a toxic relationship and a moment of ungovernable passion. Murder or manslaughter? That was for the courts to decide. Yet Jones knew, with a conviction that resonated deep within her, she'd finally sifted through the lies and found the truth. And the truth, as always, was a tangled knot of sorrow and its consequences. The trial and testimony. The courtroom held its breath, thick with dread and morbid fascination. A blur of faces lined the gallery, all eyes riveted on the witness stand, Billy's personal crucible. He fought down the knot in his throat, a stubborn impediment to speech. The borrowed jacket chafed, a constant, physical reminder of his alienation. Jones had drilled him, honesty, deep breaths. But the truth shimmered, elusive as quicksilver. He lifted his hand, the oath a mumbled offering swallowed by the rustling unease of the room. The prosecutor, her voice sharp as shattered glass, began, "Mr. Miller, describe your relationship with the defendant, Mark Olson." Hesitation hung in the air. "He was my stepfather." Billy refused to meet Mark's gaze. The man sat stone-faced at the defense table, simmering with suppressed rage. Gone was his usual swagger, replaced by a caged animal's barely leashed fury. "And your father, the deceased, Arthur Miller?" "He was a good man," Billy offered, the phrase hollow. "He always cared for me." "Did you ever witness arguments between Mr. Miller and Mr. Olson?" The question he dreaded. His palms grew clammy against the aged wood. "Yes," he whispered. "Sometimes. Elaborate, please." Her tone was soft, yet unyielding. Billy recounted raised voices, slammed doors, the oppressive atmosphere permeating the house in the weeks before his father's death. He spoke of Mark's increasingly agitated state, his nightly departures, his return hours later, face flushed and eyes burning. Did Mr. Olson ever disclose his destination during these late-night absences? Billy's eyes flickered towards Mark, catching a glimpse of something unreadable. A plea? A threat? He looked away. "No, he just said he was going for a drive, to clear his head." The prosecutor pressed. "The content of these arguments, did you ever overhear them?" He shifted uncomfortably, recalling fractured phrases through the thin walls of his bedroom. Accusations, raw bitterness. He couldn't repeat them, not here, under this scrutiny. "I couldn't really make out what they were saying," he stammered. Detective Jones, from his seat, offered a subtle nod of encouragement. He knew Billy was withholding. The prosecutor pivoted to Mark's finances, his explosive temper. With each question, Billy felt himself sinking into a quicksand of guilt. Truthful, yet incomplete. The unsaid words were a suffocating weight. A fleeting glance again. This time their eyes locked. A maelstrom of emotions swirled in Mark's gaze. Anger, yes, but also something else. Fear, or a desperate, silent appeal. The weight of it all, the omissions, the secrets, threatened to buckle him. He understood, with nauseating clarity, that his testimony, or lack thereof, held Mark's fate in its balance. And the realization was terrifying. A wooden boat. The gavel cracked down, a sound as definitive as the chasm opening inside Billy. Mark remained an unmoving figure, carved from cold stone, as the judge's pronouncement echoed, 20 years to life. Unable to face his stepfather, Billy's gaze snagged on a stray thread from his jeans, which he worried until it gave way. 20 years. An eternity stretched before him. The courtroom emptied, the sibilant murmurs and paper rustles receding with the departing figures, each burdened by their own verdict. Billy stayed put, paralyzed. Detective Jones's hand, light as a feather, rested on his shoulder. "Let's get you home, Billy," she murmured. Home. The word left a bitter taste. The house was no longer sanctuary, but a mausoleum. Robert's absence was a raw ache, now compounded by Mark's, a different species of pain altogether. The drive passed in silence. Detective Jones offered no prodding, merely navigated the streets with quiet proficiency. At the curb, she turned. "It's all right to be angry, Billy," she stated, her voice a blend of gentleness and steel. "Whatever you're feeling is valid." He could only nod, choked by the jumbled turmoil within. The house felt suffocatingly quiet. Sunbeams, filtered through the blinds, illuminated swirling dust motes. The air hung thick with unspoken grief and unshed tears. Billy drifted through the rooms, each a searing tableau of loss. Robert's armchair stood sentinel in the living room, the ghost of his pipe tobacco lingering in the air. Mark's workshop, usually a vibrant symphony of power tools, was now unervingly still. He found himself drawn to the small workbench tucked in the corner, the one Robert had crafted for him years ago. It was a chaotic landscape of unfinished projects and discarded tools. His fingers traced the smooth wood, a flood of memories washing over him. Robert's patient guidance as they constructed birdhouses and model planes. He opened a drawer, sifting through the chaos of screws, nails, and sandpaper. His finger snagged on something smooth and cool. He drew out a miniature wooden boat, exquisitely crafted, with delicate sails and a painstakingly detailed hull. He had no recollection of it. Detective Jones's presence filled the doorway. "Your father was working on that. For you," she said softly. "It was meant to be a birthday surprise." Billy rotated the boat in his hands, studying the meticulous artistry. The wood was warm and familiar against his skin. A knot tightened in his throat. He swallowed hard, fighting back the surge of tears. He didn't finish it, he whispered, his voice fractured. Detective Jones approached, her gaze unwavering. "No," she confirmed. "But he started it. He poured his heart into it. And that's what truly matters." Reaching into her pocket, she produced a small, folded paper. "I found this in his wallet. A picture you drew as a little boy. Of a boat. He carried it everywhere." Billy took the drawing, his hands trembling slightly. A crude crayon rendering, yet the boat was undeniably there. A simple, childish expression of a dream. He looked from the wooden boat to the faded crayon drawing. A wave of grief threatened to drown him, yet beneath the sorrow, a spark flickered, a nascent hope, or perhaps, simply, understanding. He finally grasped it. Robert had loved him, unconditionally, even despite his shortcomings. He clutched the boat, the polished wood, a tangible link to his father's affection. It wouldn't fill the void, nor resurrect Robert, but it was something concrete. A fragment of him, a shared legacy. "Thank you," he choked out, barely audible. Detective Jones nodded, her eyes brimming with quiet empathy. "Take care of yourself, Billy," she urged. "And if you need anything ever, you know how to find me." She departed, leaving Billy alone in the silent dwelling, cradling the wooden boat. The dust motes continued their dance in the sunlight, but now they seemed to glimmer with a soft, almost ethereal radiance. A long path lay ahead, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel entirely lost at sea. He possessed a boat,